A young Korean mafia boss never expected to fall in love at first sight with a black student during his friend's blind date. He was the ghost of Busan, until one woman looked past the silence and saw someone worth saving. Everyone in Busan knew the name Tae-sung. Not because he announced himself, because silence announced him first. At 27, he controlled shipping routes that never appeared in any registry, nightclubs that existed only in whispers, and private security firms that governments pretended not to see. Men stepped aside when he entered rooms. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. His presence was its own warning. Cold, calculated, untouchable. He ran his world like a chess game played 3 moves ahead. No wasted words. No unnecessary risks. And above everything, no attachments. He had rules, not suggestions. Rules. No trust. No weakness. No exceptions. Feelings didn't protect you. Feelings got people killed. He had watched it happen. He had caused it to happen. So he built walls where most men built relationships, and he called it discipline. He did not do cafés. He did not do blind dates. He did not fall in love. Then his phone buzzed on a Wednesday afternoon. Junho. Tae-sung almost didn't answer. Junho's voice came through nervous, rushed, the way it always did when he needed something he already knew was unreasonable. Tae-sung. Please, I need one favor. No. I promised my cousin I'd show up to this blind date. My boss just called me in. I can't make it. Just sit there for 15 minutes. You don't even have to talk. I don't do cafés. She already thinks I'm kind, Junho said. Don't ruin that. 15 minutes. Then you leave. Tae-sung was quiet for a long moment. Junho had once taken a knife meant for him. 15 minutes was nothing against a debt like that. Fine. 15 minutes. Nothing more. He changed into a dark coat and drove to a small cafe tucked beside a university library. The kind of place that smelled like old books and warm milk. The kind of place that had no use for a man like him. He chose the corner table. Mapped the exits before he sat down. Checked his watch. 15 minutes. Then gone. The cafe door opened. And Tae-sung stopped thinking entirely. She walked in the way people walk when they're trying to look calmer than they feel. Chin up, shoulders steady, eyes scanning the room. Her skin was the color of warm earth after rain. Her hair was braided neatly back. A stack of textbooks was pressed against her chest like a shield she didn't know she was carrying. She wasn't loud. She wasn't performing. She was simply present in a way that made the whole room feel quieter. Her eyes found his table. Junho? She asked softly. Tae-sung looked up. Time did something strange. He should have corrected her immediately. Should have said, wrong man, wrong table, here's Junho's number. Goodbye. Instead, he heard his own voice say, yes, and he sat back down. 15 minutes, he reminded himself. Just 15 minutes. He did not know those 15 minutes were about to cost him everything he thought he was. Her name was Temitope. She was a graduate student in sociology. Bright, direct, and completely unintimidated by silence. She talked with her hands when something excited her. She asked questions that didn't have safe answers. She drank her coffee slowly, like she was in no hurry to be anywhere else. You don't talk much, she said after a while, studying him with calm, curious eyes. I listen, Tae-sung replied. She smiled, not flirtatiously, genuinely, like that was the most interesting answer she'd heard all week. She told him about her research, migration, displacement, organized crime in East Asian port cities. She was studying the systems that kept vulnerable people trapped, and she wanted to understand them from the inside so she could help dismantle them. Power isn't violence, she said, leaning forward slightly. Power is influence over choices. The words landed quietly, then they landed hard. Men like him shaped fear for a living. No one had ever spoken to him about choices. He almost asked her to continue. She was talking about his world, and she had no idea she was sitting across from the center of it. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. He didn't leave. When he finally stood, she looked up and smiled. I'm glad you came. He nodded once and walked out into the night air. His chest was doing something unfamiliar. This was foolish. He had rivals monitoring every move. Enemies who watched for weakness the way animals watch for injury. A man in his position could not afford warmth, not even accidental warmth. And yet, all he could think about was the way she leaned forward when she believed something. The way she talked about broken systems like they were problems that actually could be fixed. Temitope, the sociology student who was studying the world he controlled. For the first time in years, Tae-sung could not clear his mind. The next morning, his men noticed. He sat at the head of the table. Reports spread in front of him. Routes, contracts, accounts. His lieutenants spoke in careful voices, waiting for his direction. Sharp, ahead of everything. That was always how it went. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. They exchanged glances. They said nothing. You did not point out weakness to Tae-sung. Not if you were wise. Later that afternoon, and he told himself it was for unrelated reasons, he found himself driving past the university. He saw her on the stone steps outside the library, highlighter in hand, textbook open across her knees, completely absorbed, completely unaware. He sat in the car and watched from a distance. She looked safe. That was the word that came to him, and it unsettled him more than any threat ever had, because he knew exactly how fragile that safety really was. He knew the routes that ran through those port districts. He knew the men who watched campuses like this one. He knew what happened to researchers who got too close to the wrong networks. He drove away before she could see him. That night, he called his financial advisor. The shipping accounts tied to the northern labor routes, he said quietly. I want them audited. Full review. A long pause. Sir. You heard me. He didn't explain. He never explained. But something had shifted, quietly, the way a foundation cracks before anyone sees the damage above. He hadn't decided anything yet. But for the first time in a long time, Tae-sung was asking himself a question he'd never let himself ask before. What kind of man do I want to be when someone worth protecting is finally watching? If you want to know what happens when she finds out the truth, and what Tae-sung does when her life is threatened because of who he is, make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment below. This story is only getting started. 3 days later, everything collapsed. Temitope's research supervisor forwarded her a newly flagged intelligence brief on Busan's most active criminal network. The primary name on the report was Tae-sung. There was a photograph attached. She recognized his face immediately. Tae-sung learned about her research on a Thursday morning. Not from her. From a man he paid to know things before they became problems. His intelligence contact slid a printed document across the desk without a word. Tae-sung picked it up slowly. Graduate Research Proposal. Department of Sociology, Busan National University. Dismantling Infrastructure. How Organized Crime Controls Labor Migration in South Korean Port Cities. The author, Temitope Adeyemi. He read the abstract once. Then again. Her research didn't just touch his world. It mapped it. Routes, shell companies, labor recruitment patterns. She was pulling threads that led directly back to operations he had spent years making invisible. She had already identified 3 port districts by name. 2 of them were his. He set the paper down carefully. His contact was watching him. Should we be concerned, sir? Tae-sung said nothing for a long moment. Leave, he said finally. The room emptied. He sat alone with the document and a feeling he didn't have a name for yet. She had no protection. That was the thought that stayed with him. Not the threat to his operations, not the exposure risk, not the dozen calculated responses a man in his position should have been running through immediately. Just that. She had no protection. She was a graduate student sitting on university steps with highlighters and textbooks, studying a world that would not hesitate to hurt her if the wrong people noticed. And she was getting close. Close enough that his own contact had flagged her name, which meant others would too. That afternoon, he drove past the campus again. He told himself it was surveillance, professional caution, nothing personal. She was exactly where he half expected. On the stone steps outside the library, one knee drawn up, a thick binder open across her lap. She was highlighting something in orange, her lips moving slightly as she read. A half-eaten granola bar sat forgotten beside her bag. She looked completely at peace. She had no idea. Tae-sung sat in the car and watched her for 4 minutes. He counted. Then he drove away before the counting became something else. That night, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to his financial operations manager. The Northern Labor routing accounts, he said. Full audit. Pull everything connected to the recruitment agencies we use in Gyeongnam province. Silence on the line. Then, sir, those accounts are actively. I didn't ask for commentary. Yes, sir. The second call was to the man who ran security across his port district operations. If anyone outside our circle starts asking questions near the university campuses, anyone, I want to know within the hour. And nothing happens to anyone without my direct order. Nothing. Another silence. Longer this time. Understood. He ended both calls and stood at his office window, looking out over the city lights spreading across the dark harbor below. Busan at night looked almost peaceful from up here. Almost clean. He knew every shadow in it. She was down there somewhere, probably still reading. Still believing that systems could be changed from the inside. Still completely unaware that the man she'd shared coffee with 3 days ago was the system she wanted to dismantle. He should disappear. That was the rational decision. Clean, efficient, final. She was a complication with a research proposal and honest eyes, and complications in his world had one solution. Distance. He had maintained distance from everything that mattered for 9 years. He was good at it. He had built his entire life around being good at it. And yet, he thought about the way she had leaned forward when she talked about choices. The way she spoke about power not as something to be seized, but as something to be accounted for. The way she'd looked at him like he was simply a person. Not a name, not a threat, not a resource. Just a person sitting across a table worth talking to. No one had looked at him like that in a very long time. Caring is dangerous, he told himself. He had always known that. Had watched it destroy better men than him. Men with more to give and less reason to be careful. Caring made you predictable. Predictability made you vulnerable. Vulnerability made you a target, and made everyone near you a target too. But the thought of her sitting on those steps, unguarded, unknowingly pulling on threads that led to dangerous men. The thought of her getting hurt. He pressed one hand flat against the cold window glass. Caring is dangerous, he thought again. And I no longer care if it is. She saw him on a Friday. She hadn't been looking. That was the part that stayed with her afterward. She hadn't been looking, hadn't been suspicious, hadn't been carrying any particular feeling about the man from the café except the quiet, stubborn warmth she kept trying to talk herself out of. She had simply taken a different route home. The port district was busier than usual for early evening. Cargo trucks idling at the gate. Workers moving in rehearsed silence. And then, cutting through it all, a black car pulling to a slow stop near the waterfront access road. The door opened. Tae-sung stepped out. She almost called his name, almost raised her hand. Then she saw the men behind him. 4 of them, positioned without being told. Eyes moving across the dock like they were measuring threats she couldn't see. One had his jacket open in a way that wasn't accidental. They moved around Tae-sung the way water moves around a stone. Naturally, automatically, like they had done it 1,000 times. A dock worker near her went still. An older man loading a cart lowered his head and turned away. And then she heard it, passed between 2 workers in a low, careful murmur, the way you say the name of something you don't want to summon. That's Tae-sung. The warmth in her chest went cold. She waited. She didn't know why. She should have walked away immediately, gone home, opened her research files and confirmed what she already felt hardening into certainty in her stomach. Instead, she waited by the waterfront railing until the men dispersed and Tae-sung turned to leave. He saw her before she spoke. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly. Something older than guilt. Something that had already made its peace with being seen. You lied to me, she said. Her voice was steady. She had worked hard for that steadiness. I hid, he replied. That's not a different thing. He didn't argue. That almost made it worse. You know what I'm researching, she said. You knew when we were sitting in that café. You let me talk about dismantling trafficking networks and labor exploitation and you just listened. Like it had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with me, he said quietly. The honesty of it knocked the breath from her. You're everything I'm trying to destroy, she said. He held her gaze. And yet you spoke to me like I was human. Her throat tightened. I don't know what's worse. She walked away. He didn't call after her. Didn't follow. She hated that she noticed. That night, his warehouse near the eastern dock burned. Not completely, his men contained it. But the message was intentional. A rival crew, testing his edges. Looking for proof that something had distracted him. That he'd gone soft. His lieutenants gathered in the back room of a closed restaurant. Voices low and tight with barely controlled anger. We know who did this, one said. Give the word. Others nodded. This was the language Tae-sung had always spoken. Swift, unmistakable consequence. It was why people feared him. It was why he had survived. He said nothing for a long moment. Power is influence over choices. Her voice, clear as if she were still standing in front of him. No retaliation, he said. The room went absolutely still. His most senior lieutenant looked at him the way men look when they're deciding if they misheard something. Sir, you heard me. No one spoke. Tae-sung stood and buttoned his coat. Audit the eastern routes. Quietly. We're done for tonight. He walked out into the dark alone. Behind him, his men sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what had just happened to the man they thought they knew. Tae-sung already understood. She had walked away from him, but somehow she had stayed. The envelope arrived on a Monday. No return address. No note inside. Just 3 photographs, printed cleanly on plain paper, slid beneath the door of his office before his men arrived for the morning. The first showed Temitope leaving the university library. Afternoon light, backpack over one shoulder. The second showed her at a convenience store 2 blocks from her apartment. Side profile. She was reading the label on something, completely unaware. The third showed her sitting on the campus steps. The same steps he had watched her from. Tae-sung set all 3 photographs face down on his desk and sat very still for 60 seconds. It was something he had trained himself to do years ago, 60 seconds before any response, because the first response was always the dangerous one. Then he picked up his phone. Find out who delivered the envelope, he said. Quietly. No confrontation until I say. He knew what the photographs meant. They weren't a threat against Temitope directly, not yet. They were a message aimed at him. His enemies had noticed the warehouse restraint. They had interpreted it correctly as softness, and now they were measuring the exact shape of it. Testing whether there was someone he would break for. They had found her before he'd even admitted to himself that she mattered. He made his decision that same afternoon. Not impulsively. Tae-sung had never made impulsive decisions. He had been turning this over since the night he stood at his office window watching city lights and finally admitted what caring felt like. The photographs didn't change his thinking. They simply removed the last reason to delay. He called his legal counsel first, then his financial restructuring team, then his most trusted operations manager. We're going legitimate, he said. All of it. Shipping and logistics. Fully registered. Every account connected to illegal labor movement gets frozen today. We invite regulatory inspectors in before the end of the month, and we cooperate fully. The silence on his operations manager's face lasted exactly 4 seconds. The other organizations will call this a betrayal. Yes, Tae-sung said simply. They will. The underworld moved fast. Within 48 hours, word had spread across every connected network in Busan's port district. Tae-sung was going clean. The cold, untouchable architect of half the city's shadow economy was voluntarily walking into the light. The reaction was not admiration. Former allies went quiet in the specific way that meant they were recalculating. 2 business partners dissolved arrangements without explanation. Anonymous messages arrived, sharper than the photographs, more specific in their warnings. His men watched him with careful, uncertain eyes, waiting for the version of him they recognized to return. He didn't explain himself. He never had. Temitope saw it on the evening news on a Wednesday. She was eating at her desk, half watching her laptop screen, when the business segment ran a brief report. A significant restructuring in Busan's private shipping sector. A previously opaque logistics network filing for full regulatory oversight. A spokesperson confirmed cooperation with labor inspectors. The company name meant nothing to most viewers. It meant everything to her. She set down her fork. She read the follow-up article. Then a second one. Then she sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She wasn't ready to call it redemption. She wasn't close to forgiveness. The anger was still there, clean and justified in hers. But something beneath the anger shifted slightly. He heard me, she thought. Then, more carefully, or he wants me to think he did. She closed the laptop. She didn't open her research files that night. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But for the first time since the waterfront, the certainty she'd been holding like armor developed a small, involuntary crack. She hated that it had. She hated even more that she wasn't sure she wanted it to close. She saw him first this time. He was standing at the riverside railing, looking out at the water the way people look when they're not really seeing it. No guards nearby. No black car idling at the curb. Just a man in a dark coat with his hands in his pockets. Alone in ordinary daylight. Temitope almost turned around. Instead she walked toward him, because she had spent 2 weeks arguing with herself and she was tired of losing the argument. "You're still dangerous," she said, stopping beside him. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Yes. That wasn't supposed to sound like a greeting." "I know." He turned slightly. "You came anyway." She looked out at the water. "Staying the same was your other option. Just so you know, that would have been worse." He was quiet for a moment. "I know that too." The river moved. A pair of students cycled past on the path behind them. Somewhere ordinary and unhurried. The city continued without them. "I don't trust you," she said clearly. "I'm not asking you to. I'm not forgiving you either. I haven't asked for that." She turned and looked at him directly. "Then what are you asking for?" He met her eyes. "Nothing. I'm just standing here." It was, she realized, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. 3 days later, she noticed something in her research feeds. A new community legal clinic had opened quietly near the Port District, fully funded, no named donor, offering free labor rights consultations to migrant workers. A second one appeared the following week in a different district. Both were staffed by legitimate human rights attorneys. Both were operating in areas her research had flagged as high-risk zones for exploitation. She cross-referenced the funding structure carefully. The trail was clean, deliberately, expertly clean, but she had spent 2 years learning how money moved in this city. She recognized the architecture of it. She sat back from her desk and pressed her fingers against her mouth and didn't say anything to anyone. They started meeting in public. Bookstores mostly. She had a habit of spending Saturday mornings in a second-hand shop near the university, and he began appearing there without announcement or explanation, browsing shelves with the focused patience of a man who had decided something and wasn't going to be talked out of it. She didn't tell him to leave. They argued instead, which felt more natural. She challenged a logistics contract restructuring she'd read about in a port authority filing. "You still have 3 agencies operating in gray areas," she said. Over coffee in a bright afternoon café. Her notes spread across the table between them. He didn't dismiss her. Didn't deflect. "Show me which 3, he said. She did. He read carefully, asked 2 precise questions, and wrote something in his phone. "Those will be closed by Friday," he said. She stared at him. "Just like that. You did the work. I'd be foolish to ignore it." No one in his world had ever spoken to him that way, like his decisions required justification, like accountability was a reasonable expectation. He found, to his own quiet surprise, that it didn't diminish him, clarified him. He taught her to drive through the city at night, the real city, the one that existed after midnight when the surface version went to sleep. Not to impress her, because she kept researching districts she didn't understand from the inside, and he'd rather she be informed than invisible. She taught him what accountability looked like from the receiving end. what it meant to people who had never had access to it. She talked about her research subjects, not as case studies but as people with names and children and specific fears. He listened every time. Not strategically. Not because it served him. He just listened. It wasn't restored trust. Not yet. The fracture was still there. She felt it every time she caught herself laughing at something he said and then remembered everything she knew about him. Every time warmth arrived, caution followed one step behind. But something real was being built. Quietly. In daylight. Without hiding. And that, she thought, was at least a beginning. Her aunt arrived on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases, sharp eyes, and absolutely no interest in being charmed. Temitope had told her only the necessary things. That she was seeing someone, that his past was complicated, that he was changing. Her aunt had listened to all of it on the phone from Accra and responded with 4 words. I want to meet him. It was not a request. Tae-sung heard the 4 words through Temitope's expression when she told him. The careful steadiness in her face that meant she was bracing for his refusal. When? He said instead. Something shifted behind her eyes. Saturday. Dinner. Her rules. Fine. She studied him. She won't be kind about it. I'm not asking for kindness, he said. Tell me where. He arrived exactly on time. No car. No coat that announced money. He wore something quiet and came alone, which Temitope's aunt noticed immediately, the same way she noticed everything, cataloging it behind eyes that had spent decades learning the difference between performance and character. Her name was never spoken in the story. She didn't need one. She was simply the aunt, which in this context meant the person whose opinion carried the full weight of family, history, and love that doesn't apologize for being protective. Dinner was home-cooked. Her aunt had insisted on that too. They sat at a small table, 3 people, close quarters, no easy exits. She began her questions before the food was finished. What do you do? She asked Tae-sung directly. Shipping and logistics, he said. Registered. Regulated. That's what you do now, she said. I asked what you do. Temitope went still. Tae-sung set down his fork. Before this, I ran operations that were not legal. Not all of them, but enough. Her aunt's expression didn't change. And you stopped. I'm stopping. There's a difference. A convenient difference. An honest one, he replied. She looked at him for a long moment. My niece studies people like you. Did you know that when you met her? Not immediately. Within days. And you stayed anyway. Yes. Why? He was quiet for exactly the right amount of time. Not calculating, just careful. Because she talked to me like my choices still mattered. I hadn't considered that before. Her aunt picked up her glass. Said nothing. Changing isn't being clean, she said finally, quietly. Not cruelly. Just truthfully, the way people speak when they want something to land without being softened. Then I'll be both, Tae-sung said. Temitope looked at him. He wasn't performing. There was no charm in his voice, no practiced delivery. He said it the way he said most things, simply with the full weight of meaning behind it and nothing decorative on top. Her aunt looked at him for a long time. Then she began clearing plates. He helped without being asked. He washed dishes while her aunt dried them, and they stood side by side in the small kitchen in near silence. He didn't attempt conversation. He didn't try to win anything further. He just stayed present and useful and quiet. Her aunt handed him a dish towel without comment. Temitope watched from the doorway. Later, when Tae-sung had gone and she was helping her aunt with tea, she asked, What do you think? Her aunt wrapped both hands around her cup. I think, she said slowly, that a man who performs goodness talks about it. A man who means it just does it. She paused. He didn't talk much. Silence settled between them. Not approval. Not absolution. But something that left a door open. And for now, in this family, in this story, a door left open was everything. The fellowship letter arrived on a Thursday morning. 6 months. University of Toronto. Fully funded research position studying labor migration policy in North American port cities. A direct extension of everything she had spent 3 years building toward. Her supervisor called it a career-defining opportunity. Her classmates called it extraordinary. Temitope read the letter 4 times, then sat quietly at her desk for a long while. She told Tae-sung that evening. She watched his face as he read it, watched him understand what it meant, the distance, the duration, everything it would test. His expression didn't collapse or perform. It settled into something careful and private. Then he looked up. "Go," he said. She hadn't expected that. "Just like that." "It's not just like that," he said quietly. "But yes." She studied him. "You're not going to tell me it's bad timing? That things are still fragile here? That you need? You don't belong to my timeline," he said. "This is yours." Something tightened in her chest. "You don't own my future," she said, softer than she intended, because she'd prepared it as a challenge and it arrived as something closer to a confession. "I know," he replied. "I want to protect it. Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him for a long moment. "What if you go back," she said finally, "to what you were, while I'm gone?" He didn't flinch from it. "That's a fair thing to worry about." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I can't give you certainty. I can tell you that I haven't wanted anything enough to stay honest for a long time. I want this enough." She didn't promise she believed him. He didn't ask her to. They chose effort instead of promises, because promises were easy and effort cost something real. The first month was manageable. They found rhythms across the time difference, early mornings for her, late nights for him. She sent him photographs of Toronto in November, gray and cold and enormous. He sent her nothing sentimental, only occasional messages. "The Eastern accounts are fully closed. Thought you should know." She read them at her desk between research sessions and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. The second month was harder. She called him during a particularly long week and they argued about nothing. Time zones, response delays, the specific loneliness of being far from something you hadn't fully named yet. She said things she half meant. He went quiet in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. "Say something," she said. "I'm still here," he replied. It was enough. Barely, but enough. The third and fourth months brought doubt. She heard things through research contacts, restructuring friction, underworld pressure on his legitimate operations, rumors about rivals pushing hard against the new boundaries he'd drawn. She didn't ask him directly. He didn't offer details. What he offered instead was consistency. He was there when she called. He listened when she talked. He didn't ask her to come back early, and he didn't pretend the distance wasn't difficult. He just stayed. She landed at Incheon on a gray Saturday morning, 6 months and 4 days after she'd left. She was tired and slightly disoriented and carrying too much luggage, and she moved through arrivals half expecting. She didn't know exactly what she was expecting. He was standing past the barrier. Alone. No guards flanking him. No car waiting at the curb behind the glass. Just Tae-sung in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, watching the arrival's door with the focused patience of someone who had decided to be somewhere and meant it completely. She stopped walking. He hadn't seen her yet. She watched him for just a moment. This man who had once controlled entire networks through fear alone, standing in an airport arrivals hall with no armor and no audience, waiting for her because she was coming home. "You waited," she said when she reached him. He looked at her. Something in his face quietly opened. "I changed," he replied. She dropped her bag. She left her bag on the floor for 3 full seconds before remembering to pick it up. In those 3 seconds, she looked at him and he looked at her, and the 6 months between them compressed into something small enough to hold. He reached down and took the bag before she could. She let him. They walked out of the airport together into the gray Saturday morning, and she noticed again. No guards, no car waiting with a running engine, no men positioned at careful distances. Just the ordinary noise of arrivals traffic and cold air, and Tae-sung walking beside her like a person who had decided, at some point over the past 6 months, that this was enough. That she was enough. "You look tired," he said. 14-hour flight," she replied. "Are you hungry?" She glanced at him. "Are you taking me to a café?" Something almost warm moved across his face. "If you want." She did. They went back to the one where it began. Small, bright, tucked beside the university library. The kind of place that smelled like warm milk and old books. The bell above the door rang softly when they entered, and Tae-sung slowed for just a moment. Barely perceptible, the way people slow when they recognize a place that changed them. They sat at the corner table. Not planned, just where they ended up. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. He sat across from her with the focused stillness she had learned, over time, was not coldness, it was attention. His full, unhurried attention, which he gave to very few things. She was one of them. Funny, she said, looking around. I came here thinking I was meeting Junho, and I came thinking I'd leave in 15 minutes. How long did you stay? Long enough, he said. She smiled. It arrived before she could decide whether to let it. I was studying your world, she said. Sitting right here, telling you everything I was going to dismantle. And I was hiding from mine, he said. Sitting right here, listening to someone talk about choices like they were still possible. She looked at him. Really looked, the way she had learned to look at things she was trying to understand completely. Are they still possible? He didn't answer immediately. Outside, the street moved in its ordinary way. Students with backpacks. A delivery cyclist cutting through traffic. The city continuing, indifferent and ongoing. The northern accounts are closed, he said. The labor routing agencies, all three of them, dissolved in October. The legal clinics are operating in 6 districts now. My name isn't on any of them. He paused. The men who used to fear me have stopped watching. Most of them have moved on. And the ones who haven't? They're watching something different now, he said. A shipping company with clean books and a full regulatory record. There's nothing to fear in that. She was quiet for a moment. That took courage, she said. Letting that version of yourself go. It took something, he agreed. I'm not sure courage is the right word. What is? He thought about it honestly, the way he had learned to think about things since her, slowly and without deflection. Choice, he said finally. It took choosing. Over and over. Every time it would have been easier not to. She took his hand across the table. Not dramatically. Not as a conclusion. Just a hand covering another hand in a small bright café on an ordinary Saturday. The simplest possible gesture for the most complicated possible thing. He looked down at their hands. Then up at her. You chose to believe, he said quietly. You chose differently, she replied. The city continued outside. The coffee cooled slowly between them. Somewhere across Busan, a legitimate shipping company opened for its Saturday operations. Clean books, registered accounts, inspectors welcome. The name Tae-sung still existed in the city's memory. But memory fades. What replaces it is built slowly in daylight, one choice at a time. He had spent his life mastering fear. What sat in his chest now, warm and unhurried and completely unfamiliar, was not power, was not control, was not the silence of a room when he walked in. It was peace. And for the first time in his life, he had no interest in walking away from it. 6 months after her return, a Port Authority journalist wrote a feature on Busan's shifting logistics landscape. It was a dry piece, regulatory compliance, labor protections, restructured shipping lanes. The kind of article that most people skimmed and closed. But buried in the 4th paragraph was a sentence that made Temitope stop reading and set her phone face down on the table. Once considered a shadow operator, the company's founder has become an unexpected reference point for transparent practices in the region's private shipping sector. No photograph. Just the name. Tae-sung. She sat with it for a moment. Then she picked her phone back up and kept reading. He had been thinking about fear lately. Not as a tool, he had spent enough years thinking about it that way. But as a period. A long, specific period of his life that had its own texture and logic, and that was, quietly and without ceremony, behind him now. He remembered what fear had built. The routes, the silence in rooms, the men who moved carefully around him. He remembered believing that was the only kind of power that held. The only kind that lasted. He had been wrong. What lasted, he now understood, was different. Slower. Less dramatic. It didn't fill rooms with tension. It filled contracts with accurate information. It showed up in clinic attendance records and labor dispute resolutions and regulatory filings that nobody glamorized but that changed the daily texture of people's lives in small, compounding ways. It was not feared. It was trusted. That had taken longer to build. It was worth more. Temitope thought about the version of herself that had walked into a café 2 years ago with a stack of textbooks and a blind date she hadn't wanted. She had been so certain then. Certain about systems, about categories, about the fixed nature of people who had chosen wrong directions. She had written entire chapters on why structural change required removing bad actors, not rehabilitating them. She still believed in those chapters, but she had added nuance since. Footnotes. Qualifications earned from watching someone choose, repeatedly and at real cost, to become something more accountable than what he had been. She had published a paper in the spring. Peer-reviewed, well-received. It examined cases where individuals embedded in criminal infrastructure had driven legitimate reform from the inside, not as heroes, not as simple redemption narratives, but as complicated, specific human beings navigating the gap between who they had been and who they were still becoming. Her supervisor called it her most important work. She thought Tae-sung would never read it. He had read every word. They were at the cafe again on a Sunday. Same table. Same corner. The bell above the door had rung softly when they came in, and the afternoon light came through the window the same way it always had, warm, unhurried, indifferent to history. Different people sat in it now. Not entirely different. He was still precise, still quiet, still capable of filling silence with a particular quality of attention that made people feel seen and slightly accountable. She still talked with her hands when something excited her. Still drank her coffee too slowly. Still believed, with the same clear-eyed stubbornness she'd carried into this place 2 years ago, that systems could change from the inside. She had proof now. He was sitting across from her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He looked at her. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. Students, cyclists, the low ongoing noise of a place that didn't know or care what had happened at this corner table or what it had cost. "That I almost didn't come," he said. "That first day. I almost didn't come." She was quiet for a moment. "Junho's blind date." "Junho's blind date," he agreed. She smiled, the real one, the one that arrived before permission. "What made you stay? That day. Past the 15 minutes. He thought about it honestly. "You talked about choices," he said. "Like they were still available. I hadn't considered that in a long time." She took his hand across the table. "Same as always. Simple. Unhurried. Love didn't change you," she said softly. "Not as accusation. As understanding." "No," he agreed. "Choice did." "Then what did I do?" He looked at her. This woman who had walked into his 15 minutes with textbooks and honest eyes and a complete unwillingness to speak to him as anything other than a person responsible for his own decisions. "You gave me a reason," he said. Outside, Busan continued. The harbor moved. The shipping lanes ran clean. Somewhere across the city, 6 legal clinics opened their doors for the afternoon. Fear had ruled his past. Choice had built his future. And Temitope walked beside him. Not as reward, not as rescue, as the person who had simply, stubbornly, at great personal cost, refused to stop believing that the distance between who someone was and who they could be was a space worth standing in. He had crossed it, not for her, for himself, but she had shown him the door. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you, truly. Drop a comment telling me which chapter stayed with you longest. Share this with someone who needs to believe that change is still possible. And subscribe for the next story. Because this is what we do here. We tell the truth about hard things, and we tell it beautifully.